The stars had always been silent until the day they spoke back. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the horizon's edge, when the signal came through. It was not random noise or natural radiation. It was a pattern, clear and deliberate, repeating in mathematical sequences that could only mean one thing. Someone out there was trying to talk. Jake called his crew to the bridge. Linda Hayes, his navigation officer, arrived first. She was young but sharp, with eyes that missed nothing. Carlos Bennett followed, wiping grease from his hands. He was the chief engineer, a man who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. Together they stared at the screen showing the signal's pattern. "This is it," Jake said quietly. "This is first contact." The message took 3 months to decode. When they finally understood it, the words were simple. "We see you. We come in peace," humanity celebrated. After centuries of wondering if they were alone, the answer had arrived. They were not alone. The universe had neighbors. The Zathreen arrived 3 months after that first message. Their ships appeared at the edge of human space without warning. They were massive, larger than anything humanity had built. The metal hulls gleamed with strange colors that seemed to shift in the light. When the first images came back, people on Earth gathered around screens to see what aliens really looked like. The Zathreen were beautiful in their own way. They stood tall, nearly 3 meters high, with bodies that looked like living crystal. Light passed through them, bending and splitting into rainbows. They had no faces as humans understood them, but they communicated through sounds and colors that technology could translate. Ambassador Peter Yang led the human delegation to meet them. He was a career diplomat, a man who had spent his life preparing for important meetings. But nothing had prepared him for this. Rachel Grant stood beside him as security chief, her hand never far from her weapon. Dr. Sophie Miller, the xenobiologist, could barely contain her excitement. The Zathreen leader called himself Overlord Kethis. He spoke through a translator device, his words coming out smooth and friendly. He talked about trade and sharing knowledge. He spoke of friendship between species and the wonders of the galaxy. He promised that humanity would benefit greatly from joining the galactic community. Humanity wanted to believe. They opened their borders and allowed Zathreen ships to dock at their stations. They shared information about their worlds and their technology. They sent delegations to visit Zathreen space. Everything seemed perfect. Then the colonies started disappearing. The first was a mining outpost on a distant planet called Kepler 442b. Commander Greg Palmer ran the small facility with a crew of 200 miners. One day his scheduled report did not come through. Communication teams tried to reach him, but there was only silence. A ship was sent to investigate. When it arrived, the outpost was empty. Not destroyed, just empty. Every person was gone. 2 weeks later, New Terra went dark. It was a farming world with 15,000 colonists. Governor Lisa Chen had reported everything normal in her last transmission. Then nothing. The silence was complete and terrifying. Ships were sent, but they found the same thing. Empty buildings, abandoned streets, and no signs of violence. The people had simply vanished. Fear spread through human space. Colonies demanded protection. Families called for their loved ones to return to Earth. But before humanity could respond, the Zathreen revealed their true nature. The warships came without warning. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel right above Mars, where humanity kept a major orbital station. Admiral Kevin Brooks commanded the defense fleet, 12 ships that represented the best humanity had to offer. He ordered them to battle stations and tried to contact the Zathreen vessels. The Zathreen did not answer with words. They answered with weapons. The battle lasted 4 hours. Human shields, which could withstand anything humans had built, collapsed under the first volley of Zathreen fire. Energy beams cut through armor like it was not there. Human weapons hit the Zathreen ships and did nothing. The alien shields absorbed every shot. Admiral Brooks watched his fleet die around him. Ships exploded or went dark, spinning away into space. He kept fighting, kept giving orders, but he knew it was hopeless. When his own ship started to fail, he gave the order to evacuate. Half his crew made it to escape pods. The other half died when the ship broke apart. Earth watched the battle through long-range sensors. They saw their strongest fleet destroyed in hours. The message was clear. The Zathreen were not friends. They were conquerors, and humanity was their newest target. Overlord Kethis broadcast a message to all human worlds. His translated voice was no longer friendly. It was cold and final. You will surrender. Your worlds will serve the Zathrene Empire. Resist and you will be eliminated. This is not negotiation. This is your future. Humanity did not surrender. They could not. Millions of humans lived on dozens of worlds. They had families, homes, and lives they would not give up without a fight. So they prepared for war, but they were not ready. The Zathrene had technology centuries ahead of human science. Their weapons were more powerful, their ships faster, their shields stronger. Every advantage belonged to them. Military commanders looked at the situation and saw no path to victory. They could fight, and they would, but fighting and winning were different things. General Victoria Price stood in the command center deep under Earth's surface. Around her, officers worked at their stations, coordinating defenses and tracking Zathrene movements. She looked at the tactical display showing enemy ships spreading through human space like a disease. Each red dot was a Zathrene vessel. There were hundreds of them. "How long do we have?" she asked. Admiral Christopher Lane stood beside her, his face grim. "The outer colonies will fall within weeks. They will reach Earth in months, maybe less." General Price nodded slowly. She had expected this answer, but hearing it still hurt. "Then we fight. We make them pay for every meter of space, every world, every life. We show them that humanity does not die quietly." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what was coming. They knew the cost would be terrible. But they also knew they had no choice. The Zathrene had unleashed hell on humanity. Now humanity would have to find a way to fight back, or they would cease to exist. The war had begun and humanity was losing. The Zathrene invasion moved like a storm through human space. Their battle groups hit the outer colonies first, overwhelming defenses before anyone could respond. Each attack followed the same pattern. The Zathrene ships would arrive, demand surrender, and when humans refused, they would attack without mercy. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded a carrier called the Liberty at the Titan shipyards. She had 800 crew members and 40 fighter craft. When the Zathrene arrived, she knew her ship could not win. But she also knew that civilian transports were loading refugees behind her. Someone had to buy them time. The battle lasted 3 days. Amy's fighters flew against impossible odds. They would destroy one Zathrene ship and 3 more would take its place. Her crew worked without sleep, repairing damage, reloading weapons, and treating the wounded. On the 3rd day, a Zathrene beam weapon cut through the Liberty's main reactor. Amy had minutes to evacuate. She saved 600 of her crew. 200 went down with the ship. As her escape pod drifted away, Amy watched the Liberty explode. She had been her home for 5 years. Now it was debris, but the civilian transports had escaped. Those lives were saved. It had to be enough. Europa Station was a research facility built into the ice of Jupiter's moon. Commander Daniel Foster ran the station with a crew of scientists and a small security force. When the Zathrene demanded he surrender, Daniel refused. He knew what happened to those who gave up. The missing colonists had surrendered. It had not saved them. Daniel's small force held the station for a week. They used the ice tunnels to move around, hitting the Zathrene from unexpected angles. They rigged explosives and collapsed tunnels behind them. They made the aliens pay for every meter. But eventually, the Zathrene brought in heavy weapons and started melting through the ice. Daniel ordered his people to escape through the old maintenance tunnels. Most of them made it to the evacuation ships. Daniel stayed behind with 10 volunteers to hold the main entrance. The Zathrene captured them alive. Overlord Kethis wanted to make an example. The execution was broadcast across all human frequencies. The Zathrene wanted everyone to see what happened to those who resisted. They wanted fear to break humanity's will. Instead, Daniel Foster became a hero. His last words were simple. Earth remembers. Earth will not forgive. Major Nicole Harper commanded the ground forces defending New Seattle on Proxima Centauri b. The city held 300,000 civilians. When the Zathrene invaded, Nicole had 2,000 Marines to defend them. It should have been impossible, but Nicole was not someone who accepted impossible. She turned the city into a fortress. Every building became a fighting position. Every street was rigged with traps. Her Marines knew the city perfectly and used that knowledge. The Zathrene had superior weapons and numbers, but they were fighting in an urban environment where technology mattered less than determination. The battle lasted 2 weeks. Sergeant Troy Bennett and Corporal Maria Santos held a choke point at the Planetary Capitol building. Their squad of 12 Marines faced hundreds of Zathrene soldiers. They held for 6 hours. long enough for 3,000 civilians to reach the evacuation ships. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with whatever they could find. Troy and Maria were the last two standing. They died together, still fighting. Nicole Harper escaped with the last civilians, but New Seattle was lost. As the evacuation ships lifted off, she watched the city burn. Another world taken, another defeat. But this defeat had cost the Zathrene dearly. They had won, but they had paid in blood and time. Yet for every small victory, humanity suffered 10 defeats. The Zathrene were winning through simple mathematics. They had more ships, more soldiers, and better technology. Human forces fought bravely, but bravery alone could not overcome such advantages. The casualty reports grew longer each day. Millions dead, billions displaced, entire worlds burned or occupied. The Zathrene strategy was deliberate. They did not just want to defeat humanity. They wanted to break them, make them too afraid to fight back, turn them into obedient servants of the Empire. On Earth, Dr. Nathan Pierce watched the reports with growing horror. He was a scientist, not a soldier, but even he could see that humanity was losing. The military tried to maintain morale by emphasizing the victories, but everyone knew the truth. At this rate, humanity had months before the Zathrene reached Earth itself. In the deep underground command center, General Victoria Price called an emergency council. The room was cold and sterile, far from the warm surface world. Present were Admiral Christopher Lane, Colonel Brandon White, and Dr. Patricia Moore. They were humanity's best military minds and top scientists. If anyone could find a solution, it was them. "Give me options," General Price said, her voice tired but firm. Admiral Lane spoke first. "We can evacuate Earth, load everyone we can onto ships and scatter through space. Some of us might survive, and go where?" Colonel White asked. "The Zathrene control most of known space. We would just be running to our death slower." "We could try diplomacy again," Dr. Moore suggested without conviction. "Maybe offer them something they want more than conquest." "They want us broken or dead," General Price said. "Overlord Kethis has made that clear. Diplomacy failed the moment they started taking our colonies." The room fell silent. Each person there had reviewed the tactical data hundreds of times. Every simulation showed the same result. Humanity could fight, but they could not win. Not with conventional warfare. Not with the weapons and technology they currently possessed. Dr. Patricia Moore broke the silence. "There is one option we have not discussed. Project Prometheus." Everyone in the room stiffened. They all knew about Prometheus. It was the project nobody wanted to talk about. The research that had been locked away and classified at the highest levels. It represented a line humanity had agreed not to cross. "Prometheus is not ready," Colonel White said quickly. "The testing is incomplete. The psychological impacts are unknown. We do not even know if the subjects would survive the process. We also do not know if it would work," Admiral Lane added. "It is all theory. We have never actually created a Prometheus soldier." Dr. Moore nodded. "Everything you say is true, but we are out of time. The Zathrene fleet will reach Earth's orbit within weeks. If we do nothing, we die. If we try Prometheus and it fails, we die. But if we try and it works, we might have a chance." General Price looked at each of them in turn. She had led soldiers her entire life. She had made hard decisions before. But this was different. Prometheus was not just dangerous. It was morally questionable. It meant taking human beings and changing them into something else. Something designed for violence and warfare at a level that civilized society had spent centuries trying to move beyond. But what choice did they have? The Zathrene had brought hell to humanity. Conventional forces could not stop them. Either humanity tried something desperate, or they accepted extinction. "Colonel White, you said the subjects might not survive. What are the actual numbers?" The colonel consulted his tablet. "Estimates suggest a 60% survival rate. Of those who survive, we do not know what psychological state they will be in. The modifications are extensive. Neural pathways will be altered. Brain chemistry changed. They will not be the same people who volunteered. And if it works, what do we get?" Dr. Moore answered. "Soldiers who can match the Zathrene in combat. Maybe exceed them. Humans without the psychological limitations that evolution built into us. Warriors who can be as brutal and efficient as necessary to win." General Price stood and walked to the large tactical display. Red markers showed Zathrene positions spreading through human space like blood in water. Blue markers showed human forces scattered and retreating. The picture was clear. They were losing everything. "We activate Prometheus," she said finally. "God forgive us, but we activate it," the vote was called. Each member of the council voted yes. They did it knowing the cost, knowing they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But they also did it knowing that sometimes survival required terrible choices. Humanity was about to learn what it could become when all other options were gone. Project Prometheus had started 20 years before the war began. A group of scientists had asked a simple question. What if humanity faced a threat they could not defeat with normal methods? What if they needed warriors who could go beyond human limitations? The answer was Prometheus, and it had been locked away because it frightened everyone who understood it. The theory was straightforward but disturbing. Take a human being and modify them at every level, change their genetics to make them stronger and faster, enhance their brain to process information quicker and react without hesitation. But the most important change was psychological. Remove the natural limits on aggression and violence that evolution had built into human nature. Create someone who could fight without mercy, without doubt, without the hesitation that came from empathy. In short, create a predator in human form. Lieutenant Jack Morrison was the first to volunteer. He was a combat pilot with 10 years of service and a distinguished record. He had also lost everything when New Terra fell. His wife and daughter had been colonists there. When the world went silent, Jack's family vanished with it. He had been angry before. Now he was cold rage given human shape. Dr. Elizabeth Cross ran the Prometheus facility. She was a brilliant scientist who understood exactly what they were about to do. When Jack arrived, she sat him down and explained everything without hiding the truth. "We are going to change you," she said. "Not just your body, but your mind. We will enhance your strength, speed, and reflexes. But more importantly, we are going to alter how you think and feel. The part of your brain that feels empathy for enemies will be suppressed. The natural hesitation before violence will be removed. You will become someone who can kill without remorse or doubt." Jack listened without expression. "Will I remember who I was?" "Yes, your memories will remain. But how you feel about them might change. The person you are now might not exist after the process. Are you sure you want this?" Jack thought about his wife's smile and his daughter's laugh. He thought about them disappearing, taken by aliens who saw humans as nothing more than resources to exploit. He thought about the Zathreen and their casual cruelty. "Yes," he said. "I am sure." He was not alone. Sergeant Michelle Davis volunteered next. She had fought at New Seattle and watched her entire platoon die. Corporal Ryan Foster had survived the destruction of his ship but lost all his friends. Lieutenant Commander Julia Grant had been at Europa Station and escaped only because Daniel Foster sacrificed himself. Captain Aaron Blake had lost his brother in the first Mars battle. Each of them carried grief and rage. Each was willing to become something else if it meant striking back. The process took 36 hours for each subject. Dr. Paul Henderson monitored the neural modifications, while Dr. Sarah Kim tracked the genetic changes. The volunteers were sedated, but even through the drugs their bodies reacted. Muscles spasmed, heart rate spiked. The screens showed brain activity changing in ways that made the medical staff uncomfortable. Not everyone survived. Private Kyle Rogers went into cardiac arrest 12 hours into the procedure. The medical team tried to save him, but his heart had been pushed too far. Ensign Laura Phillips survived the physical changes, but her neural patterns went chaotic. She had to be placed in medical suspension. The doctors did not know if she would ever wake up normal, but Jack and 4 others made it through. When Jack woke up, he felt different immediately. His body was stronger, he could tell that right away. But the real change was in his mind. The anger he had carried was still there, but now it was focused like a laser, cold and precise. He thought about the Zathreen, and instead of hot rage, he felt calculating intent. He would kill them, not because he was angry, though he was, but because they needed to die, and he was now a tool designed for exactly that purpose. Dr. Cross ran tests on all 5 survivors. Their physical abilities had increased dramatically. Jack could lift 3 times what he could before. His reaction time had decreased to near superhuman levels. But the real changes were harder to measure. She showed them images designed to trigger emotional responses. Pictures of wounded civilians, children crying, families torn apart. The normal response to such images involved empathy, sadness, and discomfort. Jack and the others showed those responses for humans. But when shown images of aliens, even non-threatening ones, Their responses were different. Cold assessment, tactical evaluation, no empathy at all. How do you feel? Dr. Cross asked Jack during his evaluation. Clear, he answered. Focused. Like I have been walking in fog my whole life and now I can finally see. Does anything worry you about the changes? Jack considered the question. I know I should be worried. The old me would be horrified at what I have become. But I am not the old me anymore, am I? I am what you made me, what humanity needed me to be. General Price met the 5 Prometheus soldiers in a briefing room. She had read all the reports and knew what they were now. Looking at them, she could see it. They stood differently than normal soldiers. There was a stillness to them, like predators waiting to strike. Their eyes tracked movement with an intensity that was unsettling. The Zathreen are attacking Luna Base, she told them. Commander Tony Lawrence is holding, but barely. His forces are exhausted and outnumbered. You will deploy there and show the Zathreen what happens when they push humanity too far. Jack spoke for the group. What are the rules of engagement? There are no rules, General Price said quietly. You do whatever is necessary to win. We have tried fighting them with honor and restraint. It has not worked. Now we fight to survive. The 5 soldiers nodded. They understood perfectly. Luna Base was humanity's last major installation defending Earth. Commander Tony Lawrence had 500 soldiers holding against a Zathreen force 3 times that size. They had been fighting for 2 days with no rest. The Zathreen kept coming, wearing them down through attrition. Tony knew they would break eventually. It was just mathematics. Then the Prometheus soldiers arrived. Jack Morrison led his team through the airlock and immediately moved toward the fighting. They did not need a briefing or time to prepare. They assessed the situation in seconds and went to work. The Zathreen were pushing through a main corridor, using their superior shields and weapons to overwhelm human defenders. Jack approached the situation like a problem to solve. The Zathreen shields were strong in front but weaker on the sides. Their crystalline bodies were tough but had joints that could be targeted. They relied on their technological advantage and expected humans to fight at range. Jack gave them something they did not expect. He moved into the corridor at full speed, faster than the Zathreen anticipated. Before they could react, he was among them. His weapon targeted weak points with precision born from enhanced reflexes and computer-like calculation. But more than that, he fought without the hesitation that hampered normal soldiers. There was no moment of doubt, no fraction of a second lost to emotion, just pure, efficient violence. Michelle Davis took her team through the side passages flanking the Zathreen forces. Where human soldiers would have worried about civilian areas or tried to minimize collateral damage, Michelle simply evaluated the most effective path to victory. She set explosives without concern for the station's structure. The goal was to kill the enemy. Everything else was secondary. The Zathreen had fought humans for months. They knew how humans operated. They knew humans tried to protect their own, hesitated before extreme violence, and could be psychologically broken. They had developed tactics based on these human traits. Those tactics did not work against Prometheus soldiers. Within an hour, the Zathreen assault faltered. Within 2 hours, they were retreating. Within 3 hours, every Zathreen soldier at Luna Base was dead. Not captured, not driven off. Dead. Commander Lawrence walked through the aftermath and felt sick despite being grateful for the victory. The efficiency of the killing was disturbing. These Prometheus soldiers had fought like machines, like something that looked human but was not quite human anymore. He found Jack Morrison checking his weapon in a corridor lined with Zathreen bodies. "Thank you for saving us," Tony said. Jack looked at him with those cold, focused eyes. "We did what we were designed to do. The Zathreen brought hell to humanity. We brought something worse." Tony had no response to that. He just nodded and walked away. The Zathreen commander, Sub-Overlord Thrakis, watched the footage from Luna Base 3 times. He had seen humans fight before. This was different. These were not the same species he had been conquering. These humans fought like apex predators, with a brutality and efficiency that reminded him of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. He sent a report to Overlord Kethis. The message was simple. The humans have changed. We may have made a mistake. But by then it was too late to turn back. News of the Luna Base victory spread through both human and Zathreen forces like wildfire. For humans, it was the first real hope they had felt in months. For the Zathreen, it was the first time they had faced an enemy that genuinely frightened them. The footage showed human soldiers fighting with a ferocity that seemed impossible. No hesitation, no mercy, just pure focused violence. General Price authorized full production of Project Prometheus. Dr. Elizabeth Cross and her team worked day and night, processing volunteers as fast as safely possible. The survival rate remained around 60%, which meant nearly half of those who volunteered died or were permanently damaged. But volunteers kept coming. Humanity was desperate, and desperate people took desperate risks. Captain Stephen Walker volunteered after watching his colony get burned from orbit. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez signed up after her sister died at Titan. Sergeant Isaac Powell lost his husband in the war's first week and carried that grief into the transformation chamber. Corporal Jennifer Brooks had been a medic who spent months treating wounded soldiers while feeling helpless. Now she wanted to do more than heal. She wanted to fight. Within a month, humanity had 200 Prometheus soldiers. Within 3 months, that number reached 2,000. It was a tiny force compared to the millions of regular soldiers, but their impact was enormous. Prometheus units were deployed to critical battles, and wherever they fought, the tide turned. The Battle of Titan was the first major engagement after Luna Base. The Zathreen had captured the shipyards months earlier and used them as a staging point for attacks deeper into human space. Taking it back was essential, but it was also heavily defended. Commander Jack Morrison led a force of 30 Prometheus soldiers against a Zathreen garrison of 3,000. Normal military doctrine said this was suicide. 30 soldiers could not take a fortified position held by 3,000 enemies, no matter how good they were. But Prometheus soldiers were not normal. Jack's team boarded a Zathreen dreadnought through a maintenance airlock. They moved through the ship like a virus, killing methodically and efficiently. The Zathreen had sensors and alarms, but they did not help. By the time the Zathreen realized where the attack was coming from, half their command crew was dead. The Zathreen fought back with everything they had. They used heavy weapons in their own corridors, caring nothing for the damage to their ship. They sent wave after wave of soldiers, but the Prometheus team kept moving, kept killing, kept advancing. Jack lost 3 soldiers during the assault. The Zathreen lost their entire garrison. When human forces boarded the dreadnought 12 hours later, they found corridors filled with Zathreen bodies and 3 Prometheus soldiers still standing, weapons ready, waiting for the next enemy. The Zathreen survivors who were captured spoke of demons. Of humans who moved too fast, who fought without fear, who seemed to enjoy the killing. Overlord Kethis watched the interrogation footage and felt something his species rarely experienced. Genuine, deep fear. Colonel Amanda Pierce commanded the operation to retake Europa Station. She had 200 Prometheus soldiers and a plan that regular military commanders called insane. She would take the station in 24 hours or die trying. The Zathreen had held Europa for 6 months with a garrison of 2,000 soldiers. They had fortified it heavily and considered it secure. Amanda's force hit them like a hammer. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, moving through the ice tunnels that Daniel Foster had used in his last stand. The Zathreen had sealed many of those tunnels, but Prometheus soldiers simply blasted through with explosives. Structural damage to the station was not their concern. Winning was the only thing that mattered. The battle was savage. The Zathreen had learned from Luna Base and prepared specifically for Prometheus soldiers. They used area effect weapons and set traps. They fought from fortified positions and tried to use their superior numbers. It did not matter. Amanda's soldiers adapted to every tactic, fought through every defense, and showed no concern for their own casualties. They treated their own bodies as expendable resources in the pursuit of victory. The station fell in 18 hours, not 24. Of the 200 Prometheus soldiers who started the assault, 43 died and 67 were wounded. But every single Zathreen soldier on that station was killed. Not one surrendered. Not one escaped. Amanda made sure of that, but something was changing in the Prometheus soldiers that worried the scientists monitoring them. Dr. Nathan Pierce reviewed the psychological evaluations and saw patterns that disturbed him. The soldiers were not just enhanced. They were becoming something else entirely. Lieutenant Ryan Foster had been known for his compassion before the transformation. He used to volunteer at shelters and spent his leave time helping colonists. Now he spoke about aliens with cold contempt. When asked about enemy casualties, he shrugged. They are not human. Why would I care? Captain Julia Grant started laughing during after-action reports when describing how many Zathreen she had killed. The laughter was not cruel exactly. It was just empty of normal emotion. She treated killing like a job and found satisfaction in doing it well. Dr. Pierce brought his concerns to the military council. "We are winning," he told General Price and the others, "but we are losing something else. These soldiers are not just enhanced humans anymore. They are becoming true predators. The psychological modifications are permanent. They cannot go back to normal life. Would you rather lose the war?" Admiral Christopher Lane asked coldly. "Because those are the options. Use Prometheus and win, or stay pure and die." Dr. Pierce had no good answer. He understood the logic, but he also understood they were creating people who could never be fully human again, people who would always carry this capacity for violence even after the war ended. The Zathreen Empire, facing losses they had never anticipated, escalated their response. They brought in shock troops from other conquered species. The Vrel were warriors the Zathreen had conquered 2 centuries earlier. They stood 3 meters tall with armor-plated skin and strength that let them tear through metal. The Zathreen used them as enforcers, sending them to battles that needed maximum violence. The Vrel met the Prometheus soldiers at the Battle of Ganymede. It was brutality facing brutality, savagery against savagery. Both sides fought without mercy or hesitation. The difference was that the Prometheus soldiers had tactics and technology on their side. The Vrel were strong, but they were also blunt instruments. Major Stephen Walker faced a Vrel champion in single combat, when both found themselves isolated in a damaged section of the station. The Vrel was larger, stronger, and had natural armor. Stephen was faster, smarter, and completely willing to do whatever it took to win. The fight lasted 7 minutes. Stephen lost 2 fingers and broke 3 ribs. The Vrel lost its life. Stephen walked away from the body without looking back, already thinking about the next fight. When the Vrel assault broke, it sent a message through the Zathreen Empire. Even their most savage warriors could not match what humanity had become. The species they had thought weak and easy to conquer had transformed into something that beat them at their own game of violence. Overlord Kethis held an emergency council with his advisors. They reviewed casualty reports and strategic assessments. The numbers were clear. The Zathreen were still winning more battles than they lost, but the margin was shrinking. More importantly, the cost of each victory was climbing. Prometheus soldiers were spreading through human forces, and wherever they went, Zathreen casualties multiplied. "We could increase our forces," one advisor suggested. "Bring in more fleets from the core worlds, and lose more ships to these human demons," another responded. "We have already lost more vessels in this campaign than in the last 3 conquests combined." Kethis listened to them argue. He thought about the footage he had seen. Human soldiers fighting with a precision and brutality that exceeded anything the Zathreen had encountered before. He thought about the Vrel, his most dangerous warriors being beaten by humans who should not even exist. "We need to reconsider this war," he said quietly. The room fell silent. Zathreen did not retreat. They did not surrender. They were conquerors who had built an empire over thousands of years. But they also were not stupid. They recognized when an enemy was more dangerous than anticipated. "Contact the humans," Kethis ordered. "Tell them we are willing to discuss terms." His advisors looked shocked, but none of them argued. They had all seen the reports. They all knew that continuing this war might cost more than the Empire could afford. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Price received a message from Zathreen Space. It was a request for negotiation. She read it 3 times, not quite believing what she was seeing. The Zathreen wanted to talk about ending the war. She called an emergency meeting. The council gathered and she shared the message. For a long moment, no one spoke. "It is a trick," Admiral Lane said finally. "They are buying time." "Maybe," Dr. Patricia Moore replied. "Or maybe we actually scared them. Maybe they realized humanity is not worth the cost." General Price looked at the message again. Humanity had been losing this war. They had been desperate enough to create Prometheus soldiers, to turn their own people into weapons. But it had worked. They had shown the galaxy what humans could become when pushed to. The peace talks took place on a neutral station at the edge of human space. The location was chosen carefully, far from both Earth and Zathreen core worlds. It was a small facility run by an independent trading consortium that had managed to stay neutral throughout the war. Both sides agreed to minimal security forces and no weapons in the negotiation chamber. Overlord Kethis arrived first, his crystalline form seeming dimmer than before. The war had taken a toll on him personally. He had started it expecting easy conquest. Instead, he had watched his fleets bleed against an enemy that refused to break. He had watched his warriors, some of the most dangerous in the galaxy, get beaten by humans who fought like demons. General Victoria Price arrived an hour later. She came alone except for 2 aides and a single Prometheus soldier. Jack Morrison stood behind her, silent and still, his presence a reminder of what humanity had become. Kethis could not stop looking at him. This was the weapon that had changed everything. A human who had been modified to be pure predator. The negotiations began formally, with each side stating their positions. But the real conversation happened in the first few minutes when Kethis and General Price spoke honestly about what had occurred. "You should have surrendered," Kethis said. "Your technology was inferior. Your forces were outnumbered. By every logical calculation, you should have accepted your defeat." "We don't accept defeat," General Price replied quietly. "That's what you didn't understand about humans. We would rather die fighting than live as slaves, and when you pushed us to the edge, we became something you couldn't handle." Kethis gestured toward Jack. "These soldiers of yours, they are not natural. You have made them into weapons that should not exist. You made us create them," General Price said, her voice hardening. "You came to our space. You took our colonies. You killed our people. We did what we had to do to survive. If that makes us monsters, then we're monsters you created." The truth of that hung in the air. Both sides had escalated the violence until it reached levels neither had anticipated. The Zathrene had brought hell to humanity. Humanity had responded by becoming something worse than hell. The terms of the peace treaty took 3 days to negotiate. The Zathrene would withdraw from all human space immediately. They would return any surviving prisoners and provide coordinates for all the missing colonists. They would pay reparations in technology and resources. Most importantly, they would declare human space off-limits to Zathrene forces forever. In return, humanity agreed not to expand into Zathrene territory and to limit the production of Prometheus soldiers. Both sides also agreed to share information about the war with other species in the galaxy. It was a warning, a message that said humanity was not to be attacked. When the treaty was signed, Kethis looked at General Price one last time. "We thought we were the apex predators of this galaxy. We were wrong. You humans are more dangerous than any species we have encountered. You take your own people and transform them into weapons without hesitation. What kind of species does that?" General Price met his gaze without flinching. "The kind that refuses to die. Remember that, Kethis. Remember what happened when you tried to exterminate us. Make sure every species in your empire knows. Make sure they understand that humans will do whatever it takes to survive." Kethis nodded slowly. "They will know. The entire galaxy will know." The Zathrene withdrawal took 2 months. Their ships left human space in organized battle groups, maintaining discipline even in retreat. True to their word, they returned prisoners and provided information about the colonists who had been taken. Many were still alive, working as laborers on Zathrene worlds. Rescue missions were organized immediately, but for many humans the war's end brought complicated feelings. They had won, but the cost had been enormous. Billions of people displaced, millions dead, entire worlds scarred by warfare. And then there were the Prometheus soldiers themselves. Dr. Elizabeth Cross spent months after the war trying to reverse the modifications. She worked with volunteers who wanted to return to normal life. The results were devastating. The neural conditioning could not be safely removed. Attempts to reverse it caused severe psychological damage. Sergeant Isaac Powell volunteered for the reversal process and came out with significant cognitive impairment. He could barely remember his own name and needed constant care. After that, most Prometheus soldiers refused to even try. They accepted what they had become and tried to find meaning in it. Lieutenant Jack Morrison stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting Earth. He looked down at the blue planet below and tried to feel something about it. This was his home. This was what he had fought for. But the emotions felt distant, like memories of feelings rather than feelings themselves. Dr. Cross found him there. She had spent more time with Prometheus soldiers than anyone else and understood them better than most. "How are you adjusting?" she asked. Jack considered the question. "I am alive. Humanity survived. That was the goal. But are you happy? Happiness is not really part of my programming anymore, Jack said with a slight smile that did not reach his eyes. I can feel satisfaction when a mission succeeds. I can feel focus and purpose. But the complex emotions that normal humans have, those are muted for me now. Dr. Cross looked at him sadly. I'm sorry. We did this to you. No, Jack said. I volunteered. I knew the cost. And I would do it again. My wife and daughter died because humans were not capable of fighting the Zathreen. Now because of what we became, other people's families survived. That has to be enough. The Prometheus soldiers became humanity's new guardians. They could not return to civilian life. Their modifications made them too dangerous, too different. Instead, they formed the Vanguard, a special forces unit designed to handle threats that conventional military could not manage. Captain Julia Grant found purpose in training new soldiers. Not Prometheus soldiers. Regular troops needed to be taught how to fight better. She was a harsh instructor but effective. Her students learned to push past their limitations, even if they could never reach the level of modified soldiers. Major Stephen Walker took a different path. He led exploration missions into deep space, places where danger was expected and his particular skills were useful. He found a kind of peace in the empty void between stars, where there were no civilians to remind him of what he had lost. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez struggled more than most. She had kept more of her humanity than some of the others, and that made the transition harder. She felt the weight of what she had done during the war, the Zathreen she had killed without hesitation, the collateral damage she had caused without concern. In quiet moments, she wondered if they had won the war but lost themselves in the process. 5 years after the war ended, Colonel Amanda Pierce gave a lecture at the military academy. She stood before a class of cadets who had been children during the war. They knew the stories but had not lived through the desperation and fear. We won the war against the Zathreen, she told them. We drove them out of human space and made sure they would never return. But victory came with a price that goes beyond casualty statistics. We learned what we are capable of when pushed to the edge. We learned that humans can be more brutal, more savage, and more terrifying than any alien conqueror. She paused, looking at each young face. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether it was worth it. We survived as a species, but we did it by creating soldiers who could never be fully human again. We did it by embracing violence at a level that civilized society is supposed to reject. Was our survival worth that cost? One cadet raised his hand. You're asking if the ends justified the means. Exactly, Amanda said. And I cannot answer that for you. Each person has to decide for themselves. I can tell you that I would make the same choice again. I would rather exist as a species that crossed moral lines than not exist at all. But I also carry the weight of that choice every day. The lecture ended quietly. The cadets filed out, thinking about what they had heard. Amanda stayed behind, looking at the empty classroom. She thought about Daniel Foster and his last stand. She thought about Nicole Harper fighting for New Seattle. She thought about all the regular soldiers who had fought with honor and restraint and died because they were not willing to become monsters. Then she thought about the Prometheus soldiers who had become monsters and saved humanity because of it. In the deep black of space, humanity rebuilt. Colonies were reestablished. Ships were constructed. Life slowly returned to normal. But everyone who had lived through the war carried the knowledge of what humanity had done, what they had become. The galaxy watched too. Other species heard the stories of the Zathreen defeat. They learned about the Prometheus soldiers and what humans were willing to do when threatened. The message spread far and wide. Humanity was not to be trifled with. They were a species that would transform their own kind into weapons rather than accept destruction. Some species saw this as admirable. Others saw it as terrifying. But all of them understood one thing clearly. Humans had proven they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, because they had no line they would not cross when survival was at stake. Overlord, Kethis lived the rest of his life knowing he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought humans were weak because they valued peace and cooperation. He had